The fluorescent lights of the conference room didn't just buzz, they screamed. It was a high-pitched, electronic whine that seemed to drill directly into the base of my skull, a fitting soundtrack for the purgatory that was Monday morning at Apex Marketing. It was 8 a.m., but the air inside the glass-walled fishbowl already smelled of stale, burnt coffee, nervous sweat, and the crushing weight of unmet expectations. I sat at the very far end of the long mahogany table, positioning myself in the blind spot of the room, trying to blend my off-the-rack gray suit into the beige wallpaper. My name is Liam. To the dozen people sitting in this room, graphic designers with dark circles under their eyes, copywriters shaking from caffeine overdoses, and account managers praying for a miracle, I was simply the new senior analyst. It was a vague, throwaway title for a guy who sat in a cubicle, crunched spreadsheets until his eyes blurred, and fetched the occasional oat milk latte from management. I kept my hands folded on the table. My suit was cheap, a polyester blend I bought at a department store sale for $90. My shoes were scuffed leather that had seen better days. But it was the object on my left wrist that drew the most attention, albeit the wrong kind. Strapped tight against my pulse was a Casio F91W. It was a humble thing. Black plastic strap. A digital display that looked like it belonged in 1995. 3 buttons. A tiny light that barely illuminated the screen in the dark. It cost exactly $10.99 at a drugstore. In a room filled with Apple Watches, Tag Heuers, and the occasional Breitling leased on credit, my watch was an anomaly. It was a joke. But to me, it was priceless. I touched the scratched plastic face, and for a second, the humming conference room faded away. I was back in a hospital room in Chicago, 3 years ago. The smell of antiseptic replaced the smell of coffee. My grandfather, a man with hands like sandpaper and a heart like gold, lay in the bed. He had worked as a janitor for 40 years. He had scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and been invisible to the wealthy executives he cleaned up after. Liam, he had whispered, his voice raspy and weak, pulling this very watch off his thin wrist. "Take this." "Grandpa, I can't," I had said, tears stinging my eyes. "It's yours." "It's yours now," he insisted, pressing the cold plastic into my palm. "Listen to me, son. This watch tells the same time as a Rolex. It ticks the same seconds as a Patek Philippe. Never let a man's jewelry fool you into thinking he's better than you. Integrity doesn't tick. It endures. Time is the only asset you can't buy back. Don't waste it trying to impress people who don't matter." He died 2 hours later. I never took the watch off. It wasn't just a timekeeper, it was a compass. "All right, listen up, you drones." The door to the conference room slammed open with violent force, snapping me back to reality. Gavin entered the room. If my grandfather was the definition of humble integrity, Gavin was the physical embodiment of corporate toxicity. He was the vice president of sales, a title he wore like a crown. Gavin didn't just wear brands, he was consumed by them. He looked like he had been vomited out by a luxury catalog. He wore a Gucci belt with a buckle so large it looked like a wrestling championship title, digging into his stomach. His suit was Italian silk, a shimmering sharkskin blue that was tight enough to cut off his circulation. And on his wrist, gleaming aggressively under the harsh fluorescent lights, was a solid gold Rolex Submariner. It was massive. Ostentatious. It screamed, "I have arrived." He threw his leather portfolio onto the table with a loud thud, making the interns jump in their seats. "Q3 numbers are garbage," Gavin announced, not bothering with a hello or a good morning. He began to pace the length of the room, his cologne, something musky, expensive, and overpowering, filling the space like a gas leak. "We are down 4%. 4%. Do you know what that means? It means no bonuses. It means I have to explain to the board why my team is incompetent." He stopped pacing and stood behind my chair. I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Because we lack excellence," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "We look like amateurs. We act like amateurs. We dress like amateurs." He grabbed the back of my chair and spun me around. The motion was sudden and aggressive. I was face to face with his perfectly tanned face and his veneered teeth. "Look at Liam here," Gavin sneered, gesturing to me with a wide sweep of his hand, presenting me to the room like I was a museum exhibit on poverty. "Look at him. The slump in the shoulders. The cheap haircut. The suit that looks like it came from a funeral home bargain bin." He reached down, grabbed my left wrist, and yanked my hand up into the air. "And this," Gavin laughed, a cruel, barking sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Look at this atrocity. A Casio? Really, Liam? Did you get this in a Happy Meal? Or did you find it in a cereal box?" The room was silent. Deadly silent. My coworkers, Sarah, the talented graphic designer who sat across from me, and Mike, the junior copywriter who was barely 22, looked down at their laps. They were good people, but they were terrified. Gavin had fired 3 people last month for bad vibes. They had mortgages. They had student loans. They couldn't afford to speak up. I looked Gavin in the eye. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't flush with embarrassment. "It tells the time, Gavin," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It tells me you're a loser," Gavin corrected, dropping my hand with a look of pure disgust, as if he had touched something contagious. "It tells me you have zero ambition. In this industry, image is everything. You walk into a client meeting wearing a $10 piece of plastic, and they don't see an analyst. They see a charity case. They think I am running a soup kitchen, not a marketing agency. You represent me, Liam. And frankly, you're embarrassing me." I slowly pulled my sleeve down, covering the watch. "I'll keep that in mind." "You do that," Gavin snapped. He walked to the head of the table and sat in the oversized executive chair that creaked under his weight. "In fact, I'm putting you on a performance improvement plan. Effective immediately." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal warning. "You have 1 week, Gavin said, pointing a manicured finger at me. 1 week to close the Sterling account. If you don't land that contract by next Friday, you're out. And do yourself a favor, buy a real watch. You look like you fix dishwashers for a living." I nodded slowly. I picked up the pen and signed the paper without reading it. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. It tasted like copper and victory. Gavin didn't know. None of them knew. He didn't know that fixing dishwashers was exactly how my grandfather started. He didn't know that my father took that work ethic, bought a single delivery truck, and built a small logistics company. And he certainly didn't know that I, Liam Sterling, had taken that small company and turned it into Sterling Dynamics, a global tech and logistics conglomerate worth $4 billion. I wasn't a senior analyst. I was the new owner of Apex Marketing. I had acquired the agency 3 weeks ago through a shell company called Red Rock Ventures. I wanted to integrate their creative team into my tech division. But before I signed the final merger documents, I wanted to see how the sausage was made. I wanted to see the culture from the ground up, without the fanfare of a CEO visit. I wanted to know who the real workers were and who the parasites were. And what I saw was Gavin, a cancerous tumor in a tailored suit. A man who bullied his staff, stole credit for their ideas, and judged human worth by the price of a watch. "The Sterling account," I repeated, keeping my face neutral. "You want me to close the deal with Sterling Dynamics?" "Yes," Gavin rolled his eyes, checking his reflection in the gold bezel of his Rolex. "They are the whale, Liam. If we get their marketing contract, our stock triples. I become a hero. But they are elusive. The CEO is some recluse billionaire named Liam Sterling. Nobody sees him. He's a ghost. He never does interviews. He never goes to galas." Gavin looked at me with deep, mocking pity. "But you wouldn't understand that level of power, would you, Liam? You're probably worried about saving money on AA batteries for that toy on your wrist." "I'll see what I can do," I said softly. "You'd better," Gavin snapped, opening his laptop. "Now, get out of my sight. Your poverty is contagious." The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological torture. Gavin was determined to break me. He seemed to take personal offense to my existence, as if my lack of vanity was an insult to his lifestyle. On Tuesday, he made me rewrite a 40-page report because the font was too plebeian. On Wednesday, he sent me to pick up his dry cleaning. When I brought it back, he threw the plastic-wrapped suits on the floor and told me I had wrinkled them. Pick them up, he had ordered, while Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. That's what you're good at, right? Janitorial work? I picked them up. I hung them on the rack. I didn't say a word. I just touched the watch on my wrist and remembered my grandfather. Integrity doesn't tick. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in the break room eating a sandwich I had brought from home. The room was small and sad, with a flickering light and a vending machine that was always empty. Sarah sat down opposite me. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed. He's on a rampage today, Sarah whispered, looking at the door to make sure Gavin wasn't lurking. He made Mike cry in the bathroom again. He told him his suit looked like it was from a dumpster. He threatened to fire him if he didn't work the weekend for free. He's insecure, I said, taking a bite of my turkey sub. He's powerful, Sarah corrected, shaking her head. He knows the board. He says he's going to be the next CEO when the acquisition happens. He walks around telling everyone he's going to fire the whole department and bring in his own Team Alpha. Team Alpha? I stifled a laugh. Yeah, Sarah rolled her eyes. He says we're Team Beta. He says we're holding him back from his destiny. She paused, looking at my wrist. He really hates that watch, Liam. I know it means something to you, but maybe you should just leave it at home? For your own sake? He's obsessed with it. I looked at the scuffed plastic face of the Casio. 12:45 p.m. The seconds ticked away. Tick. 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 No, I said firmly. This watch reminds me of who I am. And more importantly, it reminds me of who I don't want to be. I'm not taking it off for a man like Gavin. You're brave, Sarah sighed, pushing her salad around with a plastic fork. Or crazy. He's calling a mandatory all-hands meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. He sent an email an hour ago. He says he has a big announcement. Rumor is, he's firing the bottom 10% of the staff to boost the margins before the Sterling deal closes. Is that so? I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. Well, I guess I should prepare a presentation too. You? Sarah laughed nervously. What are you going to present? Your resignation? Liam, don't do anything stupid. Just keep your head down. I'm done keeping my head down, Sarah, I smiled. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. That night, I went home to my penthouse. It wasn't the gaudy palace Gavin probably imagined a billionaire would live in. It was minimalist. Clean lines, open spaces, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I didn't have gold statues or velvet ropes. I had books. I had a comfortable chair. And I had the silence I needed to think. I sat on my sofa, opened my secure laptop, and initiated the final phase of the acquisition. I logged into the Red Rock Ventures secure portal. I reviewed the final contracts. I authorized the wire transfer. $400 million moved from my holding account to the acquisition escrow. I signed the digital deeds. I officially merged Apex Marketing into Sterling Dynamics. Technically, as of 8 p.m. that Thursday, I was Gavin's boss. But I wasn't done. I needed to expose him. I needed to make sure he could never hurt anyone in this industry again. I spent the next 4 hours conducting a forensic audit of Gavin's company accounts. I had administrative access now. I scrolled through years of expenses. It was worse than I thought. Gavin wasn't just a bully. He was a thief. I found invoices for client dinners at establishments that, upon a quick Google search, turned out to be high-end strip clubs. I found expense flights to Cabo San Lucas for his executive assistant. I found that he was skimming 5% off the printing contracts by using a vendor owned by his cousin and inflating the prices. He was stealing from my company. He was stealing from the people like Sarah and Mike, cutting their bonuses to fund his fake Rolex lifestyle. I printed every document. I organized them into a spreadsheet. Then I opened the Forbes website. Every year, Forbes updated the billionaires list in real time online. My PR team had been holding back my profile update for months, per my request. I like being anonymous. But tonight, anonymity was no longer a shield. Tonight I needed a weapon. I sent a text to my chief of staff. Release the profile. Update the net worth. Push it to the front page tomorrow morning at 8:55 a.m. Make sure the photo is the one from the charity gala. The reply came back instantly. Done, sir. Good hunting. I looked at the photo they were going to use. It was a picture of me in a tuxedo, receiving an award. My face was clear. And on my wrist, clearly visible against the black silk of the tux, was the Casio F91W. I looked at my actual watch. It was time to teach Gavin a lesson about value. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The conference room was packed. Every employee of Apex Marketing was there. There weren't enough chairs, so people were standing along the walls, pressing against the glass. The air was thick with tension. Mike looked like he was going to vomit. Sarah was gripping her notebook so hard her knuckles were white. Gavin sat at the head of the table. He was glowing. He was wearing a new suit, this one a shimmering sharkskin gray that looked even more expensive than the last one. He had a new watch, too. An Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. It was flashy, geometric, and probably leased for the weekend. Welcome, everyone, Gavin smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. He leaned back in his chair, putting his hands behind his head. Today is a great day. A day of reckoning. A day of cleansing. He looked directly at me. I was sitting in my usual spot at the far end of the table, wearing my same off-the-rack suit and my plastic Casio. As you know, Gavin continued, his voice booming, we are in final talks with Sterling Dynamics. I have been leading these talks personally. I have built a rapport with their leadership. They love me. They love my vision. They see me as the future of this agency. He paused for effect, letting his ego fill the room. However, they have concerns. They are concerned about the dead weight at this agency. They want lean. They want elite. They want Team Alpha. So, I have made a decision. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of red folders. He dropped them on the table with a heavy slap. I am terminating the bottom 20% of the staff today. Effective immediately. Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you out. No severances. No arguments. Just go. The room gasped. People started crying. A young woman in the back covered her face with her hands. And I'm starting. Gavin stood up and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, with the man who represents everything wrong with this company. The man who brings down our property value just by sitting in the room. Liam. Me? I asked, not moving. Yes, you, Gavin sneered. You failed to close the Sterling account. You failed to improve your image. You are still wearing that disgusting plastic watch. It's an insult to me. It's an insult to this room. You're fired, Liam. Pack your box. Get out. I didn't stand up. I didn't pack my box. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was buzzing. It was 8:55 a.m. Are you deaf? Gavin shouted, his face turning red. I said you're fired. Put the phone away. Security. Get in here. I think you should see this, Gavin, I said quietly, holding the phone up. I don't want to see your severance begging. Gavin stormed down the length of the table. He snatched the phone out of my hand. You think you can text your mommy? You think you can call a lawyer? You're a nobody. He looked at the screen to turn it off. And then he froze. It wasn't a text message. It was a notification. A Forbes news alert. Breaking. Tech mogul Liam Sterling acquires Apex Marketing in hostile takeover. Net worth jumps to $4.2 billion. And right below the headline was the photo. It was a photo of me. The man sitting in front of him. I wasn't wearing a cheap suit in the photo. I was wearing a tuxedo. But on my wrist, unmistakably, was the same black plastic Casio F91W. Gavin's eyes went from the phone screen to my face. Then back to the phone. Then back to my face. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like a magic trick. He went from tan to ash gray in 3 seconds. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His jaw literally dropped, hanging slack like a broken hinge. His hands started to shake. "Liam. Sterling?" he whispered. The name came out like a strangled choke. "That's my name," I said, standing up slowly. Although around here, I'd been going by the senior analyst. The room went deadly silent. Sarah gasped so loud it echoed. Mike looked up, his mouth open. This is a joke," Gavin stammered, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped my phone. You drive a Honda. You fetch coffee. I yelled at you. "I like the gas mileage," I said calmly. "And the coffee?" It was lukewarm. "We're going to get a new espresso machine." I reached out and gently took my phone back from his trembling fingers. "And this watch?" I tapped the plastic face of the Casio. "My grandfather gave it to me. He taught me that integrity is worth more than gold. A lesson you seem to have missed, Gavin." I walked to the head of the table. Gavin scrambled out of the way, retreating until his back hit the whiteboard, erasing his own sales projections with his expensive jacket. I sat in the executive chair. It squeaked. It felt comfortable. "Let's look at the numbers, shall we?" I said. I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen flickered to life. Instead of the sales chart, a spreadsheet appeared. "Gavin Miller," I read aloud to the silent room. "Corporate theft, $45,000. Fraudulent expenses, $12,000. Kickbacks from printing vendors, $8,500. Moral bankruptcy, priceless." Gavin slid down the wall, looking like a deflating balloon. He looked at the door, thinking about running. "You're not just fired, Gavin," I said, my voice cold and hard. "My legal team is in the lobby. They aren't here to escort me out. They are here to serve you with a lawsuit for grand larceny." I looked at the rest of the room. At the terrified faces of the staff who thought they were losing their jobs. "Nobody else is getting fired today," I announced. "In fact, everyone is getting a 20% raise to compensate for the toxic work environment you've endured. Except Gavin. Gavin is getting a ride in a police car." The silence in the conference room was shattered by the sound of a heavy door opening. 2 men in dark suits walked in, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. "What is this?" Gavin squeaked, trying to stand up but failing. "You can't arrest me. I am a vice president. I drive a Porsche." "You leased a Porsche," I corrected him, scrolling through the audit report. "And according to our records, you used the company credit card to make the last 3 payments. That's embezzlement, Gavin." The officers stepped forward. They pulled Gavin up by his arms. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 was the loudest sound in the world. "Liam," Gavin begged, looking at me with wild, wet eyes. "Mr. Sterling. Please. It was a misunderstanding. I was testing the system. Take the watch. Take my Rolex. It's yours. Just tell them to let me go." I stood up and walked over to him. I looked at the gold watch on his wrist. "May I?" I asked. Gavin nodded frantically. "Yes. Take it. It's worth $40,000. I unclasped the watch from his wrist. It felt heavy. Gold usually does. But something was off. I turned it over. I looked at the movement through the crystal case back. I smiled. "Gavin," I said, holding the watch up to the light so the entire room could see. "The second hand is ticking. It's jumping." "So?" He wept. "A real Audemars Piguet has a sweeping second hand," I explained calmly to the room. "It glides. It doesn't tick. This watch runs on a quartz battery. It's a fake." I tossed the watch onto the mahogany table. It slid across the surface and stopped in front of Mike. "It's a fake," I said. "Just like you." The gasp from the staff was audible. To them, Gavin was a tyrant, but a rich tyrant. Finding out he was a fraud wearing a counterfeit watch was the final nail in his coffin. His power evaporated instantly. "Officer," I said. "He's all yours." They dragged him out. Gavin didn't walk with dignity. He kicked. He screamed. He threatened to sue everyone. As they pushed him through the glass doors of the lobby, the entire office stood up and watched. Nobody waved goodbye. I turned back to the room. The atmosphere wasn't celebratory yet. It was petrified. They had just watched their tyrant king get dethroned, but they didn't know if the new emperor was going to be any better. They looked at me, the guy who fetched coffee yesterday, and now saw a billionaire who could buy and sell their lives on a whim. Mike, the intern, was trembling so hard his chair was vibrating against the table. Sarah was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, holding her pen like a weapon. "Sit down, please," I said gently. My voice wasn't the booming shout Gavin used. It was quiet. They sat. Slowly. Cautiously. I looked at the mahogany table. It was scratched where Gavin had thrown his portfolio. It was stained where he had spilled coffee and made someone else clean it up. "I know this is a shock," I began, making eye contact with every single person in the room. "And I want to apologize. I lied to you. I pretended to be an analyst because I needed to see the truth. I needed to know if this company was worth saving." I paused. "And the truth is, this company isn't worth saving." The room gasped. Sarah dropped her pen. But I raised a hand, stopping the panic. "The people are." I picked up the stack of red folders Gavin had brought in, the firing list. I held them up. They were heavy. They represented mortgages, tuition payments, grocery bills. "Gavin wanted to fire the bottom 20%, I said. "He thought you were the problem. He thought you were dead weight." I ripped the folders in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud and satisfying. I ripped them again, and again, until they were just confetti. I tossed the scraps into the trash bin in the corner. "I am not firing the bottom 20%, I announced. "I am firing the top 1%. I pointed to the empty chair at the head of the table. "Gavin is gone. His team Alpha is dissolved. From now on, things are going to be different. No more mandatory overtime without pay. No more expensive suits as a requirement. If you want to wear a hoodie, wear a hoodie. If you want to wear a Casio." I tapped my plastic watch. "Wear a Casio. What matters is the work. What matters is the time you put in, not the price tag on your wrist." I looked at Mike. He looked like he was about to faint. "Mike," I asked, "how much were you making?" 45,000, sir," he stammered, sweating. And Gavin made me pay for my own parking." "Make it 70, I said. "And the parking is covered. Retroactively." Mike started to cry. Not sad tears. Relief tears. "And Sarah?" Sarah straightened up. She was the only one who had treated me with kindness when I was a nobody. "Yes, Mr. Sterling? You're the new VP of Creative," I said. "Gavin's office is yours. The corner one with the view. Just, maybe call a cleaning crew first. And smudge some sage in there. It smells like desperation and cheap cologne." For the first time in months, laughter filled the room. It started as a nervous giggle from the back, then spread until the whole room was laughing. It was the sound of a weight being lifted. The sound of freedom. "Now," I said, clapping my hands, "I believe we have a marketing campaign to finish. And I believe I owe you all lunch. Who likes pizza?" The transition wasn't overnight, but it was thorough. Over the next few weeks, Sterling Dynamics absorbed Apex Marketing. We gutted the toxic policies. We installed new leadership. We replaced the coffee machine. I went back to my headquarters uptown, but I kept tabs on the team. They were thriving. Without Gavin's boot on their necks, productivity soared. They closed the Sterling account, not because of fear, but because they were inspired. As for Gavin, his fall was absolute. My legal team didn't hold back. We pressed charges for the theft, the fraud, and the embezzlement. The Porsche he drove was repossessed the day after his arrest. His landlord evicted him from his luxury apartment when the checks started bouncing. His executive assistant mistress blocked his number the moment the money ran out. He pleaded guilty to avoid a long prison sentence. He got 3 months in county jail, 5 years of probation, and a court order to pay back every cent he stole. He was blacklisted from every marketing firm in the country. I didn't think about him much. I was busy running an empire. Until 6 months later. It was a rainy Friday afternoon in November. I was sitting in my office on the 40th floor of the Sterling Tower. The city looked gray and washed out through the glass. My assistant, Jessica, buzzed in. "Mr. Sterling," she said. "The rep from Time and Toner is here for your 2 p.m. He says he has the lowest bid for the quarterly paper supply." I sighed. I usually didn't take these meetings, but I like to keep costs down, and I respected a hustle. "Send him in," I said, not looking up from my paperwork. The heavy oak doors opened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling," a voice said. It was a voice I recognized. But it lacked the boom. It lacked the arrogance. It was shaky. Humble. Broken. I looked up. Standing in the doorway was a man in a uniform. He wore a navy blue polo shirt with Time and Toner embroidered on the chest. He wore khaki pants that were a size too big. He held a heavy sample case in both hands, his knuckles white. His hair was thinning, no longer styled with expensive gel. He looked 10 years older. It was Gavin. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. He hadn't known. He thought he was pitching to a procurement manager. He didn't know he was walking into the lion's den. He clutched the sample case like a shield. His eyes darted to the door, calculating if he could run. "Liam?" he whispered. "It's Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "Come in, Gavin. Have a seat." He hesitated. Then, slowly, he walked across the plush carpet he used to think he was too good to walk on, and sat in the guest chair. He looked small. The arrogance had been scrubbed off him by the harsh abrasive of reality. I didn't know this was your office," he mumbled, staring at his hands. "I can leave. I can send someone else." "No need," I said. "We need toner. We need paper. Pitch me." He looked at me, confused. You want to hear the pitch?" "I'm a businessman, Gavin. If your price is right, I buy." "Proceed." He took a deep breath. His hands shook as he opened the case. He pulled out brochures. He started talking about paper weight, about ink viscosity, about bulk discounts. It was awkward. He fumbled his words. He dropped a pen. But he got through it. He did the work. When he finished, silence filled the room. "That's a good price," I said, looking at the sheet. "Better than what we pay now. We'll take 50 cases of the premium stock. And a toner contract for the year." "Really?" He looked up, genuine shock and hope in his eyes. He needed this commission. I could see it in his frayed collar. I could smell the cheap soap on him. "Yes," I said. "But Gavin?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" I pointed to his wrist. He wasn't wearing the fake gold Rolex anymore. He wasn't wearing the Audemars Piguet. He wasn't wearing a watch at all. There was just a pale tan line on his skin where the gold used to be. "You're late," I said. "My appointment was at 2 o'clock. You walked in at 2:05. Gavin looked down at his naked wrist, ashamed. I don't have a watch, sir. I had to sell the other one. For parts. It wasn't worth much. And my phone is, well, it's a prepaid. It doesn't always work." "Time is money, Gavin," I said. "You used to tell me that. You used to tell me that image is everything." "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was an idiot." I opened my desk drawer. Inside, sitting on a velvet pad, was a small cardboard box. I had bought it last week, having a feeling our paths might cross again. Or maybe just waiting for the right moment to teach the final lesson. I slid the box across the massive oak desk. "Open it," I commanded. Gavin looked at the box. He looked at me. He reached out with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside sat a watch. It wasn't gold. It wasn't diamond encrusted. It didn't have a Swiss movement. It was a Casio F91W. Black plastic. Digital display. Price, $10.99. Gavin stared at the cheap watch. His eyes filled with tears. A single drop fell onto the plastic face. "Why?" he asked, his voice choking up. "After everything I did to you?" "Because it keeps perfect time," I said softly. "It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It works. It endures." I stood up and walked around the desk. I picked up the watch and handed it to him. "Take it," I said. "Right now, Gavin, time is the only asset you have left. You lost the money. You lost the status. But you have time. Don't waste it trying to look rich. Use it to become real." He took the watch. He strapped it onto his wrist. It fit perfectly. It looked better on him than the fake Rolex ever did, because this one was honest. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Liam." "Now get out," I said, walking back to my chair. "And bring the toner on Monday. Don't be late." He stood up. He wiped his eyes. He picked up his sample case. He walked to the door. But this time, he didn't slouch. He walked a little straighter. He had a job. He had a contract. And he had the time. I watched him leave. The heavy door clicked shut. I looked down at my own wrist. The same cheap Casio was still there, ticking away the seconds of a life well lived. Some people wear their net worth on their sleeve, hoping to convince the world they matter. I prefer to wear my values. And they both cost exactly $10.